Welcome back. So with the load-shedding power crisis that you and I are living through at the moment, there are huge questions around how our power network is changing and where our electricity is coming from now, where it's going to come from in the future. It doesn't really matter how you look at it. The role of solar power is clearly going to grow in the future. It's probably the cheapest form of energy that is available at the moment. Sometimes people talk about the high quality of solar radiation in South Africa. What they mean is that you might have noticed is that it's pretty sunny. Dr. Rethabile Melamu is the CEO of the South African Photovoltaic Industry Association, representing the solar industry. Dr. Melamu, good afternoon to you, and thanks for your time. Let's start with the national grid at the moment. How much power that we're using is coming from solar energy at the moment?
Good afternoon, Stephen, and good afternoon to your viewers. Thank you very much for inviting Sabia to your show. We are contributing about 2.4 gigawatts. We're generating about 2.4 gigawatt of capacity, and that was procured through the REAP program. We do have 61 projects online with 10 more that will come online once we close bid window 5 and the risk mitigation round. I must indicate, though, Stephen, that that is a utility scale. We are seeing some revolution at embedded generation market segment, and we are estimating that we probably have about 1.5 gigawatt capacity installed from our rooftops, but that is largely driven by installations at commercial and industrial sectors. So we're seeing quite a promising uptake, which is much needed for the crisis that we find ourselves in as a country, which isn't going to go away in the next 2 years. So I think we are well positioned at Sabia to address the challenge because we operate across the entire value chain of solar, from utility embedded generation. And you would have seen that there are solar PV systems that are cropping everywhere on everyone's roof. So we're in for a good time as an industry.
I'm not going to say that the weather forecast is sunny, because I'm sure that joke's been made too many times. When you talk about the number of gigawatts, is it possible to express that as a percentage? In other words, if we look at how much electricity we're using now in the national grid that we're all buying through various means from Eskom. I know at one point, I think there was a peak last year. I can't remember if it was about 18-20% of the electricity that was being used in the country came from solar power. Is that figure roughly right?
The 20% is probably on the high side. Just to give you context, if we combine the projects that have been procured through the REAP program at about 2.4, and you consider another 1.5 gigawatt from embedded generation, we're looking at well over 4 gigawatt of installed capacity. And if you take about 40 to 44 total capacity, installed capacity in the country, we are looking at about 10%. I think the number was also including wind energy. And together with that and possibly storage that is increasing, we are creeping towards that 20%. And I think in the next 2 years, we'll probably be close to that number if all the parties that need to participate in planning for this crisis come to the table and make sure that we can generate additional capacity that this country needs.
So, I mean, if you were allowed to, if there was no sort of regulation, you didn't have to worry about ministerial determinations and things, how quickly could you actually add more electricity to the grid? I mean, how quickly, say, 2-3 years, would you be able to add a lot more?
We're very bullish as the renewable energy sector. We think that in 2 to 4 years, if restrictions were not an issue, we could add up to 5,000 megawatts of solar capacity, just solar alone, and we're estimating that about 5,000 could come from wind. And given that the cost of storage has drastically dropped, we think we can possibly combine those two technologies with storage. And I believe that we can avert load shedding, which I think is not going to go away in the next 2 years. Solar and wind can be deployed very quickly. In 2 to 3 years, we can avert it completely. And it has been proven to be a lot more cost effective. And of course, it helps us address our own climate goals and climate targets that we have committed to as a country through the COP26.
And then you talked about embedded generation, a little bit of a revolution moving on there. We remember the President and the Minister, Mantashe, raising the limit to 100 megawatts. It was supposed to sort of basically blow the whistle on the race between mines and big companies to see how much power they could produce. We don't see a huge number of projects. We see them from time to time. Are you expecting a lot more companies to get into this space quite quickly?
We think so. We have actually seen perhaps 100% increase or even more of registered projects. If you compare this year's first quarter and second quarter, if you compare the number of projects that have been registered by NESA, the increase there is drastic, and we are likely to see a lot more increase, given that there are a lot of projects that are in the pipeline. You would know also, Stephen, that municipalities that are in good financial standing can procure directly from IPPs. There are a few challenges there, but if that market is unlocked by making sure that the country has a willing tariff that is in the purview of NERSA, and that institutions like SALGA support municipalities put in place a willing framework, that would then open that additional market segment. That would bring in the much needed capacity online.
And government policy, how do you feel about Minister Mantashe's policy towards energy at the moment?
As Savia, we don't like to engage too much on how the minister and government is doing. Suffice to say, what government did in 2020 by lifting the cap, registration cap from 1 megawatt to 100 megawatt has been really a catalytic to developments in the industry. As an industry, we think and believe that renewable energy can play a substantial role. And so perhaps considering whether 100 megawatts is actually the cap that is required, or opening up the market to allow for procurement of more projects. And really that comes from the integrated resource plan. We are encouraged by the fact that the ministry, the DMRE, is considering reviewing that document, because the targets for renewable energy in that document are simply too low, and they will not address the challenge that we currently have. So I think whilst government has done some work, there is a huge really opportunity that they may be missing out in not opening up the market a lot wider to allow for more generated capacity to come online.
Dr. Rethabile Melamu, thank you. CEO of the South African Photovoltaic Industry Association, representing the solar industry.